Approximately 20 years ago, the term verifier was mentioned to Mr. Wali Bahar by Chief Minister Najib Muhammad during a car ride from an event in Detroit, Michigan. Mr. Bahar has been a member of the Lost Found Nation of Islam long enough to be a witness to its history. What you will hear in Wali Bahar, the Verifier, is information that he has lived through as a young believer and today is a fountain of wealth, of knowledge that is not to be lost. You will hear a conversation with Mr. Bahar that will touch on the earliest times he had in the company of the Honorable Silas Muhammad and of his appointment as the personal captain to the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, how he served him and pulled the sheet over him in Mercy Hospital at the time of his passing. Peace be upon him forever. Mr. Bahar was there in Chicago, Illinois, when the Honorable Silas Muhammad was forced to leave Chicago. And Mr. Bahar was there when the Honorable Silas Muhammad returned to Chicago, Illinois, to deliver the Declaration of Spiritual War, which brought about the rise of the Lost Found Nation of Islam for the second time. It is with the utmost admiration, desire, and respect to keep the memories and works of our foremothers and forefathers alive. We, the producers, Malik Shabazz Ali, in association with Invisible Man 733, presents The Verifier, Wali Bahar. Mr. Bahar, what can you remember about your childhood in Mississippi?
I was born in 1937, Columbus, Mississippi, and my father passed when I was about 4 years old. My mother was from the farm, and my father was from a plantation. And during that period of time, there was a conflict between my father's side and my mother's side as to her being so dark-skinned on the farms. Up until this day, there's been some issues with that I don't really want to get into. I was born in the town of Columbus, but when my father passed, my father's family sent us to live with my mother's family, which was in the country, and I stayed there. That's where I grew up on my mother's side. And when I left Mississippi, I ended up in St. Louis with my mother's brother.
What about growing up in Mississippi when you did stands out the most?
The most was the white man, how his rule was.
In the early 1900s, vicious attacks against African Americans were almost as common in the North as in the South. In the summer of 1908, a white mob attacked African Americans in Springfield, Illinois. During the riot, 2 black men were lynched, dozens more injured, and homes and businesses were destroyed and burned. Thousands of African Americans fled the city in search of safety.
I always disagreed with how he treated black people. I didn't understand that. That stood out more than anything.
Mr. Bahar, tell us a little about your home life. What was the composition of your family, sister, brothers, extended family?
I had one brother, one sister. My sister was the oldest, my brother was the next, and I was the baby. lived on the farm of my grandmother. They were very, very poor. No running water, no toilets, no nothing, just poor. And my education, my first learning was my mother's sister who taught me the nature of things, not from a book, but from the animals. Before I even learned what reading is. That's basically, there's a lot to it I could say, but that's basically what it is.
Is it true that you are the son of a Caucasian?
She had three sons, and one was dark, very dark, and one was very light. And my father was one that could pass for white. He was so light. And that's where I really later on found out the dark-skinned Uncle Walter was placed in charge of the plantation, the land. And Uncle Roy was placed in, I call him the field brother, the yard brother, and the house brother. Uncle Roy was in charge of the education and outside of the plantation. And my father was one who I never learned what he was, but I knew he was the inheritance to carry on the plantation.
Mr. Bahar, were you aware of this relationship to a Caucasian as you grew up?
Yes, very much so, up until this day.
Did this information cause kids to be unkind to you?
I would say it was unkind because we were treated different than the rest of the Moorhead family.
Were you able to get to know your dad, or were you estranged?
No, I lived with my dad until he died. Not me, my brother, and my sister. And all I know of him is what my sister tells me. Only thing I can remember of him is at his funeral. And at his funeral, what stands out in my mind is the preacher was saying my father had died and gone to heaven to be with the Father. And I always question to this day, who are you telling me this? And no one answers me to this day.
What, Mr. Bahar, were your thoughts as a child of being of mixed parentage?
I didn't particularly like black, and I didn't particularly like white. I felt like I was between somewhere in the middle of that, and I grew with that concept until I was around 16, 15 or 16 years old.
Were you a Sunday school, church going youngster?
Uh, all of us was church going. My sister tells me that when I was in the church and people were shouting, I started shouting, and the deacons put me out of the church because the music stopped, and I kept shouting. And they took me to the back of the church, she says, and when she got me, they had admonished me for making mockery of the church, of which I don't remember that.
What was your favorite subject in school and why?
Mathematics, because mathematics is something that I could understand from arithmetic, and that was my first study of education, was mathematics.
What hobbies did you have as a child and have they continued into adulthood?
Sports, football, and animals were my favorite interests.
Mr. Bahar, can you tell us when was the first time you realized that racism existed?
My first TV I saw is when I got to St. Louis. I was around 13, 14, and my uncle had a TV, and the first person I saw on that TV was a young fella, light-skinned, and playing a strange instrument. And I asked my uncle, who was it? He told me he was not a Negro. He was from one of the islands, and his name, guess what his name was? Lewis Walcott.
Has the relationship between Caucasians and Afro-descendants been something of interest to you? And if so, when did it become a burning issue?
I learned of the value of black and white in St. Louis before I got to California. Was a writer named Lewis, and he was writing about black history. And in that writing, his title was J.A. Rogers. That was his name. He went under the writings. And in that writings, he would give us history of black, and the way he would present black is not the way that I had learned about black, and that was the origin of my beginning to study the blackness of a black man, and took pride in it. And that's what drove me where I found Islam in California.
Tell us about whether or not you were ever in the armed forces of America.
No. I wanted to get in the armed forces, but they rejected me, and they said that I was qualified because my thinking was not normal.
In growing up in Mississippi, would you address the level of economic status you, your family, and your community had?
I was twisted between poverty and that which is not poverty. With on my father's side, a plantation owner, my grandma Hattie, on the plantation there were modern equipment, and everything you could think of was handy and available. And I would love to go visit her, and I remember the acres and acres of fruits, acres and acres of everything that would be on a farm in small portions was in great portions on the plantation. And between my mother's side, of which I grew up on, and my father's side, of which I experienced, I found out what wealth was and what poverty was. I was from the poverty area, having been born in the wealthy.
Was field work something that you did as a younger man?
Field work? You mean like picking cotton? I don't remember being old enough to pick cotton. I do remember being old enough to carry the water out to the cotton pickers, and being able to ride on the wagons when it was going to be weighed, and to be experiencing after the cotton season, where it was pulling season, where the cotton was picked, but I had a chance to pull the boll that was left after the picking of the cotton. I do have that experience on the farm.
Mr. Bahar, talk about the need to understand self and at what age it began in you.
In 1951 or 52, I heard Malcolm.
Today our people can see that we're faced with a government conspiracy. This government has failed us. The senators who are filibustering concerning your and my rights, that's the government.
And I was already involved. I was in California, and I was involved with Black Studies. And I heard Malcolm speak of house nigger, field nigger, yard nigger.
The house Negro, if the master say we got a good house here, the house Negro say, yeah, we got a good house here. Whenever the master said we, he said we. That's how you can tell a house Negro. if the master's house caught on fire, the house Negro would fight harder to put the blaze out than the master would. If the master got sick, the house Negro would say, "What's the matter, boss? We sick."
And I always said to myself, that's Uncle Roy, Uncle Walter, and my father. And I began to study that, and then I became interested in the Black Panther movement in Oakland. And in that middle 50s or late 50s, I ran into another young man like myself, but he was different. He had education, and he had all that I felt I would want to have if I was raised an educated man. His name was Silas Bell.
When did you discover romance? Not physical touch, but the idea of romance. And what is a so-called understanding of spiritual love?
My first romance was a young lady I met during my course of school, and she was in the 11th grade, and I was in the ninth grade, of which I never got past the ninth grade because when she graduated, I quit. But that was my first love. After that, the next love was a woman I married in California. And I met her, she was in high school. Her name was Carolyn Pinton. And I have my oldest daughter by her. And when I became a Muslim, she left me and took my daughter. Spiritual love, I would say my first understanding of spiritual love is when I met Silas Bell. We became so close that the only thing separated us is the physical love I have for a woman. But the depths of the love I had for my brother, and that's what we've always called ourselves.
Mr. Bahar, what did you see yourself doing as a young person? Your desire to do to make a living?
I decided in Mississippi to sell drugs. That's why I left Mississippi. At that point, drugs were not even that popular. And I wasn't old enough to even know it, but I had the experience because my stepfather's son came from New York, and he was a drug addict. And I learned to deal with drugs at a very, very early age. So when I got to the city, I understand what my lifetime earnings would be. My first physical job is when I got to Los Angeles. My brother was already there, and he was working at General Motors, and he got me a job at General Motors, and he was a foreman on the assembly line. And I held that job until I became a Muslim.
When you became a young adult, how long was it before you left Mississippi?
I left Mississippi when I turned a teenager. So my adult life was St. Louis and California.
At what age did you become acquainted with contemporary Islam?
Um, in 57, 58, I became acquainted. I did not join, but I became acquainted. I was like 21, no more than 22, somewhere around there.
When did you decide to become a practitioner of contemporary Islam?
Practitioner. Uh, After I met Silas Bell, he too had, when I met him, he too had become an interest in Islam. And we began to study together. And then we both came into the nation. I believe he came in before me because he was more acquainted with the officials when I came in. But we got our X together. And I knew that that was going to be the life I was going to live. And I was married to a woman prior to that, my first wife. And I came home one day and threw all the pork out. And when she found out how serious I was, she took my daughter and she left me. Never came back.
How did you meet the Honorable Silas Muhammad?
Up to this day, I can't remember. I know no one introduced us. I know that I was a lover of jazz and he was a lover of jazz. And I'm thinking that we met somewhere in that area. But maybe he has that answer. I can't remember how we met. But I know we have always been close from the day we met to this day.
What was it about him that made you become friends?
He was sincere. He was a gambler, and I was a hustler. And there are very few sincere hustlers, and very few sincere gamblers. And he would gamble horses, and I would question him about gambling because I never took a chance on money. And he says to me, I don't bet on the horses. I studied to find out why would anyone bet on the horses, to find out what makes a horse great. And that is one of the things that fascinated me. And in our experience before we came into the mosque was my moral conscience was a little lower than his. And when it come to women, what he would refuse is things I couldn't understand. Him refusing. And we had many experiences with women, before coming into the nation, and it was very interesting to me.
When you became a student of contemporary Islam, what was your primary goal?
My primary goal was I wanted to be a minister, and what I would do, I would tape Malcolm's audience applauding what he taught, and I would add my speech to it, and I would bring it home and play it for Silas, and like there was my audience listening to me. And one day he just broke down and started crying and said, I want to teach. You always try to teach. And I've never tried to teach since then until I got in the nation. But I always wanted to be a minister.
Take a moment, Mr. Bahar, and tell us and talk about some of the places you've lived and how being a contemporary Muslim added a different dimension to your life as opposed to when you were not a contemporary Muslim.
Well, I came from Mississippi, and I just shared that with you, my experience with poverty and wealth. And I lived with my uncle, in St. Louis. I lived with my uncle Buddy, who was a Baptist preacher converted from being a pimp, and who was, I wouldn't say wealthy, but he was well off enough that all the things that I would want, I would wish he was my father. And after that, I got into jazz, and when I got to California, I met a guy named Dexter Gordon, and I adopted him as my father. So I took the name Dexter Gordon Jr., got my ID under Dexter Gordon Jr., and I kept that name, used that name rather, until I got to be a Muslim.
Mr. Bahar, when did you decide to get a name? Where did it come from? Did you choose it or was it given to you?
I decided to get a name. The only name I decided was Dexter Gordon Jr. And when I came in, the next change was Bobby Lee 2X. And from that history of Bobby Lee 2X, I go from California to Santa Barbara to Chicago to Akron, Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, and back to Chicago, where I've been for the last 50 years in this house.
Sir, from the beginning of your understanding of contemporary Islam until today, have you ever practiced Orthodox Islam?
No, I had the experience in 1975 to 1976 where Warideen Muhammad had inherited me, and he spent a whole year teaching me what an imam is. And after he and I visited Mecca and my experience with him in Mecca when we returned in 1977, he found that I was hopeless. He just couldn't convert me to that.
When you and the Honorable Salis Muhammad connected and began to build as men the LFNOI under Messenger Elijah Muhammad, did you ever think that you would become a person that he depended upon for his physical safety and the preservation of his life?
I've always felt that I was a protector of Silas way before we got to be Muslims. After we got to be Muslims, Silas can bear witness, we would sell papers and we would go into bars and we would find satisfaction with that. And we would go hunting for people that was in violations of black women. And his experience with me during that course of time that we lived, he can testify. I felt like I was his protector. I did not understand that until I received the name Wali Bahar from Elijah Muhammad away from him. He had nothing to do with that.
Did you ever think that you were inadequate for the task of protecting Allah's last messenger?
No, no, I didn't realize I was being made. You'd have to understand how I was a minister. He sent me to Akron, Ohio, and assigned me to reopen number 9 in Youngstown and take charge of number 43 in Columbus, Ohio. And I had established a reputation that I felt I was doing pretty good as a minister. And one day, Minister Theodore Hamza, who had the largest mosque in Ohio, number 18, I wasn't under him, but he was watching me, and he reported to the messenger that I was teaching something contrary to him. And what it was, I was teaching that Elijah Muhammad was my father, Elijah Muhammad was God, and that whole bit. And he called me in, he told me that he was ashamed of me teaching that kind of teaching that I was not qualified for, and disgracing him, putting him in the place of Allah, Master Farad Muhammad. And he didn't bust me as minister. After beating me up, he sent me back to teach. And then a month later, he called me to his home in Chicago and told me, I want you to be my captain. Find somebody to take your place as minister.
Mr. Bahar, once you began to be around Messenger Muhammad, how did your idea of him as a human being, a man, change from the understanding that he was also Allah's last messenger?
He balanced me out and made me void of spookism. He brought me close enough to him that I could see him as a human being. And I was so readily prepared, just the experience of serving him this close. When he brought me to Chicago, he made me captain, and he did not give me any duties. And in Chicago, Raymond Sharif was the supreme captain. Elijah Muhammad Jr. was the assistant supreme captain. And Yusuf Shah and Captain Ali was the national captains in the region. Salas Muhammad was Muhammad Speaks captain, and it left me to be nothing but I'm the captain. And all of my directions came directly from Elijah Muhammad himself. I never had to answer to any of the officials. I called it personal because no one could take it away from me. And when he gave me my name, I asked him, what did Wali mean? He says it means a friend. And I said, the Holy Apostle, Allah's your friend. He said, it means more than a friend. He said, it means a protecting friend. I said to him, Allah is the only protection you need. And then he said to me something I'll never forget. He said, when you come to me other than what I say you are, you will have no protection from me killing you. And that was personal to me. You know, and I told Silas after 1975, I told him what I was and am to Elijah Muhammad. If I'm not that to you, then you have a problem with me.
There is much information that has been said and written about the decision that Mr. Muhammad made concerning the relationship of our queen. But take a minute and tell your thoughts about when she came to Los Angeles and how her arrival impacted you as an FOI and the brother to the Honorable Salas Muhammad.
When she came to Los Angeles, I was single. I was divorced. And I heard about her. I had been studying Elijah Muhammad since the 50s, 58, 57. And in my study of Elijah Muhammad, I ended up studying his family. And in the study of his family, I ended up studying his son, Akbar. And when he went to Mecca, I was studying Akbar. And when he married Harriet, I was studying Akbar. So my studies switched from Akbar to Harriet when she came back. And then when she came back to Chicago, and when she left Chicago to come to Los Angeles, I heard she was coming. And I had an interest in her. And I told Silas, I said, you know, the sister's coming to Los Angeles. I'm going to try to make sure I get to meet her. He told me, I've already met her, and I think you should just lay that out of your mind. That's how we encountered her at that time. And when she came to Los Angeles, strangely, she had a roommate of a woman, ended up my second wife. Her name was Diane. I can't say a roommate, but they were close friends. And when Silas married Harriet, I ended up marrying Diane. Our lifespan before Islam, after Islam, has always coincided. And even when I went to Santa Barbara to teach. But anyway, that's my gist on that.
As you function in the capacity as the personal captain to Messenger Elijah Muhammad, how did you understand his business acumen?
I wasn't that much involved with his business. I was more involved with his personal desires, his personal wishes, whatever he's in. My first assignment as captain was to go to Newark, New Jersey and investigate the murder of a man they called Thunder, the minister there, James Shabazz. And In that investigation is where I ran upon Clarence, the brother who started Five Percenters and that whole group of area people. And it put a different thought in my mind as to my role as his captain.
Mr. Bahar, as a brother in the ranks, and then as an official in various temples, how would you come to see those in charge, like the late Malcolm X, and the ministers that are legends today, like Jeremiah Shabazz, and people like Lonnie Shabazz, the mathematician, and so on? Give us your impressions of those that we look up today that were in the first rise. And take your time and tell some stories of some of the things that you did together. Please.
Malcolm, I didn't have that much experience with except 1962 when he came to California. April 27, 1962 was when Brother Rumtu Stokes got killed. The devil has attacked the mosque, and I was living around the corner. But I had admired him up until that point, and I knew more about his captain, Joseph Shaw, than I do more about Malcolm. But I do have my study of him and my admiration of him. And it hurt me deeply when I found out that he had rejected the messenger on issues that I personally had knowledge of that I did not reject. And I have a classification of him that I have in my mind, and I don't just get to put that on no public forum. I have a classification of Jeremiah in my mind. I don't decide to put that on classification. I do say in 1975, when Wallace took over, the elements of Philadelphia became well known as to infiltration. And I had the privilege of experiencing being told by Wallace that the FBI is coming. I was at his home, and don't touch them. They'll come on into the house. And the brothers who took my place were all from Philadelphia, and all were from the penitentiary. That's, I don't care to get into the details of that. It's not my business. I know Jeremiah eventually stepped toward supporting Silas before he passed. I called a meeting when Silas stood up. I called a meeting, this was in 1977, somewhere around there, with Hamza, Mr. Hamza, Mr. Jeremiah, Mr. John Muhammad out of Detroit, John Ali, and it was one other brother, can't think of his name. It was called the Elders, and I wanted them to meet Silas, but all of them had an opinion of him, and I told them, I just want you to meet the brother because I know him personally. And we had 4 meetings. First one was in Chicago, the other one was in Cleveland, the other one was in Atlanta. And after that meeting, decisions were made that brought us to a moment that we're in probably today. As far as the minister, Lonnie Shabazz, out of Cincinnati, that's where he was. When I was ministering in Ohio, he and I became very close. He was a mathematician. And Dr. Shabazz and I became extremely close, and I would go up, sell papers with him and his group in Cincinnati, and we would go once a month to return our reports in Chicago. And I always had a love for the brother and his humbleness. I never could put him in a clique with any of the other ministers. He was above all of them in his intelligence. And when we would sit at the table, he would make it known. And the only one at the table that would always speak, I felt, was like angered me. His name was, what was his name? He was a dentist. Out of Newark. The name slips me out. Sad to say I can't remember the brother's name. Doctor, dentist. Man, Leon Cully was his slave name. Man, as well as I know the brother, if I could mention his name and you know him, we only have one dentist that I know of who was the messenger's dentist that had doctor on his mouth. You know, he was always sitting at the table, but he was always negative in his, not negative in the sense of opposition, but negative of going deep into the teachings of questions at the table.
For the next set of questions, I'll say a name, a word, or a phrase, and you give your thoughts. Muhammad Ali.
Cassius Clay. Belinda. Those are the two first names come to my mind, because I can remember Cassius Clay meeting Belinda at the bakery on 71st Street, and I told him then, you'll never get to the innocence of this baby, you know. And we laughed and joked about it, and that's my response to the name, the word you mentioned, Cassius Clay.
Minister Farrakhan.
That I go back to St. Louis. The foreigner, my uncle called. He said, "He's not a Negro." That's what my uncle told me. He's not a Negro. He's from one of the islands, and I admired him then when I found out his talents, and what influenced me, greatest thing influenced me of defining the message for the white man's heaven and the black man's hell. He had wrote this song, White Man's Heaven, Black Man's Hell, which I loved. I loved it. It was just touching my soul. And then he wrote a play about a Negro spelled backwards, which was outstanding. And then I had experience with him at the table while being the messenger's captain. And I can remember things he said at the table about him that he has repeated many times. I was at the table when he told him he was praising him, the messenger was praising him, and he told him, "Dear Apostle, you made me." And the messenger said, "No, Allah is making you for me." And I was at the table when he told him, he was telling the messenger how great of a time he had in one of his meetings, and the messenger told him, "I want you to be as great as you can be. So when you come so great, if you turn hypocrite, everyone would see you. You wouldn't be able to deny it." And I was also present on the rostrum when he told him, "Come on away behind that sycamore tree." And then he told us, "Wherever you see him, look at him. Wherever he say go, go. Wherever he say go, stay from, stay from." All these things, along with a multitude of others I've experienced with Farrakhan, that is hard for me to accept how others view him, because I was there to see what made him like he is. And I don't think he is acting. I think he is being what he think he should be.
Wallace D. Muhammad.
My my man Wallace. I've been studying him since the 50s. As I said, I started studying Elijah Muhammad in 58, 57. And I ended up studying his mother and all of his children. And Wallace Muhammad, from my very inception of Islam, has had a unique place in my studies. And I've been close enough to Elijah Muhammad to hear him validate and clarify and explain all of those things. And I remember sitting at the table, and the secretary had a lecture where Wallace was going against his father and talking about Master Prophet Muhammad was not Allah. And I mean, terrible against him. And everybody had an opinion. All the ministers had an opinion. I made one statement. The only pastor, you don't have to worry about that no more. And he made a statement to me, don't harm a hair on my son's head. And that cleans my hands of even a thought of dealing with Wallace before his father died. And I was there after he was put out of the mosque several times, but the last time he was put out, I remember when he came back on the Savior's Day, he and his cousin, Hussein, I call him Butch, they came back and asked for forgiveness for the public. Butch asked for forgiveness, apologized for everything. And Wallace, when he got up, he said, I feel I have found that only Allah can judge my father. And that's how I saw him coming back. I never heard him apologize for what he said. He said, I found that Allah is the only one who can judge my father. So I lived through that. So, at the time, in 1974, the Labours started a program of introducing Wallace to all the mosques. And they did that, all the mosques. And in 1975, when we found out he had passed, it did not surprise me about Wallace taking over. And Wallace inherited me. He never chose me, and I never chose him. He never accepted me, and I never accepted him. But we had to work together for a whole year and a half. And the honest time that he felt that he couldn't convert me to Orthodox Islam as an imam is when he was getting ready to teach all of the ministers and captains about the prayer. And he had taught me step by step what it means. And he held a meeting at the Muhammad Speaks newspaper. And that's where he introduced the prayer. And the first time I heard the Adhan spoken is when I heard Don El Kareem give the Adhan. And after he gave the Adhan, I explained the positions of prayer. And after that, I never performed anything for him. And in 1977, he fired me because he changed all the captains to consultants, which means that he would look stupid with me as a captain, guarding him on the rostrum. So my experience with him ended on that time.
Bean pie.
Bean pie. Greatest pie I ever tasted in my life. I couldn't believe it tasted like a sweet potato pie. Sweet potato pie, beans and pies don't even go together. I'm a country boy. When you say bean and pies, it's not something I can correlate in my mind. It tastes like a sweet potato pie. But we were in Los Angeles when I really first tasted the bean pie. And it's so unique. I know the original taste of a bean pie. So when people cook the bean pie and I know it's not right, I don't care who cooked it. I can tell you it ain't right. Bean pie has to be perfect or it's imperfect. There's no such thing as almost perfect. It's either perfect or it's imperfect. And it's been a long time since I've had a bean pie.
Muhammad speaks.
Muhammad Speaks newspaper was my life. Silas and I spent a lifetime. Everybody else had a mission when they come into mosque. Most people have some form of mission. Silas and I loved selling the papers. You know, we would go to places that paper sellers don't go to. We go to the bar and set up at the bar, and the people be sitting there drinking, and we pull out papers from under our suits. You want to get a paper, bro? I mean, it's such an experience that you'd have to have a love for it in your heart to be a grown man selling papers. And I know professional men. London Shabazz is one. I sold papers with it. You know, just the word Muhammad speaks, it gives you a strength to know the Muhammad Speaks newspaper was a weapon, is a weapon. It was greater than the ministry. It was greater than the mosque. It was a weapon and is a weapon that it cuts to the very heart of the people. It's almost like the word Afro-descendant. The word Afro-descendant is a word that I don't particularly care for, but the definition that has been applied to it identifies everybody that needs to use it. The definition of the word that Silas wrote gives a value to it. So that's how I see Muhammad Speaks. Muhammad Speaks wasn't a newspaper. You have to look at the last page to see the contents of it. Don't mean nothing. All the paper did was get to this last page. What the Muslims want, what the Muslims believe. Everything else is covered in that.
First resurrection.
I am the first resurrection.
Second resurrection.
We're in the process.
Contemporary Islam versus Orthodox Islam.
I don't know what contemporary Islam is. I know what Orthodox Islam is. I'm assuming contemporary Islam is what you're defining as the concept Elijah Muhammad gave Islam. I'm assuming that's what you call it, contemporary. I don't refer to it as contemporary. I refer to it as the new form of Islam. You know, it's not. It can't be classified and associated as if it was before. It's never been like that before. It's new. It's completely new. It was not revealed to Prophet Muhammad 1400 years ago. That was revealed to them by a white man to white people. What has been revealed to us has been from a white man to black people from where we came from, black people. Islam is what I am. I'm a Muslim. If there was no Islam, I'm a Muslim. I don't need Islam to be a Muslim. Muslim is my nature. I was born this. I did not know what it was in Mississippi because I was other than myself. So I don't take nature and put it in any classification for the human being.
Reparations.
Reparation is something that's due to us if the definition that's given to Afro-descendants is what reparation requires to answer. Whatever the definition for Afro-descendants requires for reparation to address that. In order to address that, you have to have this thing called ethnogenesis. Ethnogenesis. You have to come through that stage. you're talking about.
Afro-descendant.
Afro-descendant is a word that has been around for a long time, but the meaning of the word has only been around a short time. So my whole thing is the meaning that has been put to the word. Take away those who have been using the word if they don't fit the definition of the word. And those who don't accept the word can deny the definition don't fit them.
The term Afro-descendant refers to descendants of peoples who were forcibly dispossessed of their homeland, Africa, were transported to the Americas and slavery diaspora for the purpose of enslavement, were subjected to slavery, were subjected to forced mixed breeding and rape, have experienced, through force, the loss of mother tongue, culture, and religion, and or have experienced racial discrimination due to lost ties or partially lost ties from their original identity.
Afro-descendant government.
Afro-descendant government, I have yet to see that manifest in its complete form to even acknowledge that it is. Okay. I can see it at the emphasis of it. It's infant stage, but it has not matured enough that I can tell you what it is.
Mr. Bahar, when did you join the Lost Found Nation of Islam?
1962.
Tell us, where were you when you became a member of the Lost Found Nation of Islam?
Los Angeles.
Mr. Bahar, why did you join the Lost Found Nation of Islam?
The white man's the devil. See, that is something that most people probably get questioned when I answer that. See, I didn't come into the Nation of Islam because of Allah. I came in this Nation of Islam because when I heard the word the white man is the devil, I knew for a fact that's the truth. By my own experience. I wondered to myself, why didn't I say that? Why didn't I see that? And I know the white man is the devil, and I know the devil is God and has ruled to this day. To this day, he has ruled. I learned about Allah. I didn't learn about the white man. I experienced him being the devil.
At the time you joined the Lost Found Nation of Islam, had you attended the local church in your hometown?
No.
Did you initially see any difference in Christianity and contemporary Islam?
Yes.
Did you in your wildest imagination think that what was written in the scriptural books was to take place during your lifetime?
No.
Sir, would you speak on the understanding you had as a young believer in the Lost Found Nation of Islam and the differences in church and temple wisdom?
The difference in church and temple? Very little. Very little. They're the same in ritual form. They differ in the reality of their belief.
As you matured in the Lost Found Nation of Islam, what stand out as the most defining thing that should be of historical significance?
The military discipline.
As you two sold papers together, did you see his earnestness to do a good job as real or manufactured energy?
He was a sincere, as a Negro, he was sincere. I see life changes. Living remains the same. Living is the expression of life. So when ones live the same, whether you are a nigger or a Muslim, the way you live the life should be the same.
Sir, as you became more familiar with him and have been close for so long, what is the secret of continuing to be good friends and brothers?
To go through trials, difficulties, and remain the same.
In the first resurrection, were the believers truly sincere in your opinion? And give examples without singling anyone out, please.
Some were, some were not.
Is it true that some believers were not sincere in their beliefs? And give examples, again, not singling anyone out.
Authority. Authority changes most people. Authority makes sure to define the sincerity of a person's ability.
Can you put us, the inheritors of the lost found Nation of Islam, into the mindset with words what it was like to be involved in building a nation? And if we, in the second rise, seem to grasp the fundamentals of nationhood that was present during the time of our mother's administration.
Um, in the first rise, there was not only belief, but there was loyalty to the belief. And in the second rise, that the loyalty has to be built because the trust is not there. Until the trust is built, the loyalty cannot exist. First rise, the trust was overwhelming, so the loyalty was evident. We trust the messenger. The leaders now is questionable.
There are things that everyone loves, and here's your chance to say why you love Islam.
I love Islam, like I love breathing. It's natural with me. It's natural. What is unnatural is a ritual form of practice to be what I am. I don't need a ritual form for me to be what I am.
Why did you love the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, peace be upon him?
I love him because he's the greatest mind that I have ever encountered in any person I've ever met. To this day.
Having such a close relationship with him, explain to the viewers what made him so very different than anyone else that you have known.
What he taught others, he had to live in order to be qualified to teach them. And many of them don't understand what he had to live to go through to qualify to teach them so they would not have to go through.
Give an estimation of the degree of love that existed within him for Almighty Allah God, Master Farad Muhammad, in your opinion.
In order for me to answer that, I have to go to where he taught us how they met and what he did. What he did when they met is he told the prophet, I see you according to the Christian life I've lived. And I see you, as the Christians say, the man that's coming in the end, the Son of Man, the Mahdi. I see you as doing that. He shared with me these words. Prophet Farad had converts, many converts, of what they heard him say. They say, I can't say how many saw what he said. I can only say what I saw he said, not what I heard him say. And what I saw, I told him what I saw. So from that, I tell everybody, when someone says something to you and you don't see what they said, they haven't said anything.
What has being an FOI meant to you?
A rehabilitation.
Was the first Rise Muslim man militant in their approach to life in comparison to the Muslim man of the second Rise?
First rise was the excitement of being a new man, different from the old man. The second rise have not yet manifested the difference.
What was the community like in terms of how believers got along or didn't get along?
Unity and support of each other.
What was the first position of leadership you attained as believer? And describe how it made you feel.
Oh man, Mosque number 27, under the greatest minister I think that's equal to any minister, John Shabazz, and the greatest captain that I would say that ever lived, Edward 2X Ali from the West Coast, Mosque number 27.
Tell the audience what it was like to sit at the table or be in the mansion of Messenger Elijah Muhammad, and how it was normal to be privy to information the average believer was not aware of.
My privilege is so private until uh, I'll give you something that very, very few, if any, can say. My son was the first one born in the palace of his home. My wife was pregnant, had the baby, and went back to work.
Tell the audience about the statement you were present to hear about Minister Farrakhan becoming a hypocrite.
What I just explained. Want him to be as great as he can be. If he turns hypocrite, he can't deny he is, because the greatness he had become.
When did you first meet him and your initial impression? And how does it hold up to the passage of time?
The way I've always seen him, I don't see any difference as I see him now. He's always been a very talented man. Before he became a Muslim, during the time he was a Muslim, up until this day.
The same question about the Savior, Silas Muhammad, and has your initial impression of him held to the test of time?
But the same impression I had on him when I first had experience with him coming into mosque is the same expression I have of him, and will be that way till he died.
Mr. Bahar, talk briefly about Wallace D. Muhammad, his rise and fall in your own words.
I think he was meant to rise. I think he was destined to fall. And his father could have stopped his rise and could have avoided his fall. So his father told us the nation would fall and rise again. He knew what he was talking about, and he knew his son would take it down. For he told us at the table, he said, there'll come a time that you who sit with me will be ashamed to say you even know me. I saw that time with Wallace. And let me say, I love Wallace. You know, I love him. I lost respect for him. I didn't stop loving him. I lost respect for him. I can't stop loving him because his father taught me how to love him. Wallace didn't earn my love. His father gave the love.
That statement about hearing a baby cry for his mother in reference to the Savior is where you may begin to talk about the thing that unseated Wallace.
When I heard Silas was coming, and then I heard he had landed, and then heard him speak, I heard a baby cry. The baby didn't speak any words that made any sense to me, but I heard him crying. The only thing he said to me that made sense, the reason it disarmed me, is when he said these words: I am the spiritual son of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I said to myself, that's my brother. I can defend that. Because I know how he got to be that. I can walk the experience up until his birth. I've been with him in the womb of the man's mind. I can walk from the time we entered, and I can walk to his total development.
Talk about some of the heavyweights you brushed shoulders with and actually soldiered with as an FOI. Muhammad Ali, Farrakhan, Herbert Muhammad, John Ali, and others that will be remembered as standouts.
Herbert Muhammad, uh, I have some difficulties with and some joyful times with. But he always made the statement, I don't know how you got so close to my father. And we would always laugh about it because there's no answer to that. That's me and Herbert. John Ali have been so close that to this day, we talk about how he was what he was in FOI, coming from the FBI and being converted into Islam, and stayed a Muslim all his life.
Respond to the statement FOI, to I die, and tell the audience why.
I was born to die, and I was born to be an FOI.
Sir, having witnessed the rise and fall of the lost found nation of Islam, take a few minutes to tell about the things that made the lost found nation of Islam legendary.
Malcolm, Farrakhan, Wallace, Herbert, Muhammad Ali, Jeremiah, Edward Terrell, Yusuf Shaw, many others that I can think of that gave the power to the rise of the nation. But the greatest of them all is when Elijah Muhammad told Prophet Muhammad what he saw, he said, rather than what he heard everybody else say.
Mr. Bahar, speak to the fact that those that were in the ranks with you were now Orthodox, and were you yourself a believer in Orthodox Islam?
Not to speak to the facts. The one thing that disturbed me is Abraham Bacha, whom I didn't think would ever, switch over. Kazim Ahmed, I kind of knew he was tendencies, even in the first, he was studying Arabic. But one of the ones that shocked me the most, Captain Edward Sherrill, when I went to New York to deliver the second Beast paper, and I had to go to the mosque and then enter into a place where he was just like an imam and acting like an imam and on his knees praying. Never dreamed I would see this man bowing to nothing.
From what you know about the lost found nation of Islam, will it actually survive Armageddon and be victorious in its efforts to remove Afro descendants from America before she is completely decimated by the mothership?
I think we are in the judgment. I think we're in it now. I think the departure was exemplified with the teachings of Silas, exemplified with him leaving, and this is his second return to me. And this is not something, the teachings that he left with, he can't come back teaching that he left with. So I'm looking to see in this judgment, this Armageddon that is taking place right now, I'm looking to see which of us will survive. For nowhere did Elijah Muhammad say it would be victorious. He said, when you come to this time, the lie and the truth is equally in the same place. And the only one will survive is one that has evidence to prove itself in it. And that will separate it out of it. So you're not going to separate and survive. You're going to survive the destruction, and that will separate you.
Is there really a mothership?
I don't question the messenger's teachings. I question the interpretation of it. And I question people who have turned it into an association that does not make clarity. Because the teachings of Islam that Elijah taught was a reality. You could touch, you could see, not just believe. And the teachings I'm hearing now about the mothership is a belief. Everything is being said has not yet been proven, except it exists. Now the works of it I have not seen, unless it's a spiritual form. That's very possible. But with the teachings that we all have about the mothership and where it was made and how it took off and its purpose, I don't have the understanding to teach on that or even acknowledge it. I can only deal with the reality I live, and that is I breathe, I walk, and this is the earth I live on.
Having seen a lot of the LFNOI, the Lost Found Nation of Islam, can you, sir, give us your most outstanding recollections about what should be recorded for history?
It's Silas' return, first time. Because Silas' return defines Farrakhan's rise. Because according to my brother Farrakhan, he would have been an entertainer in the world if it had not been for Bernard Kushmir bringing him a book at a hotel. And Bernard Kushmir would not have had the money to go to the hotel if Silas did not buy his ticket. So I would give Farrakhan the credit for bringing the nation to recognition, but I'd have to also say if Silas had not bought the ticket for Bernard Kushmir to take the book he had to Farrakhan, where would Farrakhan be? According to him, he would be an entertainer. So I have to say the greatest thing that has happened in the rise of the nation is Silas.
Spiritual family, physical family. What is more lasting and why?
Spiritual famine we've already went through with the death of Elijah. Physical famine, only one of us gonna survive to talk about it. We've been through all the spiritualities we're gonna go through. This that we're going through now has not been written. See, you used to look at things and say, oh man, Scripture said that, this said this, but this that we're going through has not been imagined or written. Only we who write this history. For it's never been before. We've never been in slavery. We are the new people that I call the I am people. Only we can speak for us.
Mr. Bahar, leave the audience with what you feel they should take with them as they remember everything that made the lost found nation of Islam worthy of dedication, service, and commitment.
I'm going to leave you with 3 words. Nature, natural, and unnatural. Woman is the nature. Man is natural. And that which is neither of those is unnatural.
Who is Wali Bahar, the Verifier, in one sentence?
The first name is a friend, a protecting friend, I am, which is a brother. The last name, I will give it to you and listen very carefully. Bahar means an unmeasurable amount of water with no life in it. I call it dry water.
What guidance would you offer to the incoming fruit?
Be what it is you learn yourself is.
What do you think of the Afro-descendant nation?
I'm waiting to see how many people can identify with the definition that's been given to the word Afro-descendant. It may be fewer people than you think it is that fits the word. There might be a multitude of people that's using the word before a man was wise enough to put some meaning to it.
We want you to know that the lost found nation of Islam is under the direction of the Honorable Silas Muhammad, who restored the practice of contemporary Islam back to the people with his courageous stand on August 21st, 1977. Wali Bahar, the Verifier, is a production of Malik Shabazz Ali in association with Invisible Man 733 presents. Thank you for viewing The Verifier, Wali Bahar.